The fluorescent lights of our small town branch in Odisha always gave me a splitting headache, but absolutely nothing made my stomach turn quite like sitting directly across from Mukesh. It was a typically slow Tuesday afternoon. Mukesh was slouched deeply in his rolling chair at counter number 2, wearing his usual crisp white shirt and those brown checkered trousers he always seemed so remarkably proud of. He was scrolling mindlessly on his smartphone, representing the very definition of a workplace slacker. As a fellow co-employee working at the adjacent counter, I usually tried my best to completely block him out of my mind and focus entirely on my own financial ledgers. However, today felt entirely different, and the very air inside the bank felt incredibly heavy and unsettling. That was the exact moment when the old man first walked through our doors. He looked completely and totally detached from anything resembling modern city life. His dark skin was deeply weathered by years of labor. His salt and pepper hair was tightly curled, and he wore nothing but a coarse, tattered two-piece outfit made out of a rough, burlap-like fabric. He was entirely barefoot, with his feet completely caked in the thick, dry dust of the local countryside. He looked precisely like he had walked straight out of the deep, isolated jungles of the state, which, as I would later find out from the authorities, he actually had. The security guard working at the front entrance, who was usually incredibly strict with visitors, took one long look at the old man's bewildered, innocent face. He kindly guided him forward into the main lobby, pointing him right toward Mukesh's desk, and softly instructing the old man to head straight to counter number 2, because Mukesh handled all of those specific types of customer matters. The old man approached the glass counter very hesitantly. He spoke absolutely no English, and his native Odia was incredibly thick with a remote tribal dialect, but the sheer grief written across his face was completely universal. He began to explain his situation to Mukesh, sharing that his sister had recently passed away after a very long, grueling medical illness. Her husband had already died years ago during the peak of the corona wave, leaving her completely alone. She had spent her final days living in a small hut near the countryside area, while her brother, this old tribal man, lived much deeper within the dense forest with his own immediate family. When he had initially learned of her sudden death, he had traveled all the way to her countryside hut to perform their traditional funeral rites. Unlike the vast majority of people in India, his specific tribe did not cremate their dead. Instead, their ancient customs required them to bury the bodies directly into the earth. The old man was completely illiterate and could not read a single word, but the sympathetic neighbors living near his late sister's hut had told him something incredibly important. They informed him that she kept a savings account at our nearby bank branch. He did not understand anything about interest rates, banking regulations, or digital transactions, but he understood the basic concept of physical money, and he knew that he was now the only surviving person left in their family lineage who had a right to it. He had carefully searched through her empty hut, eventually found a weathered bank passbook, and brought it straight to our branch. With trembling hands, he lifted the worn document and showed the passbook directly to Mukesh, whispering softly that he was all that was left of his family, and that he desperately needed to take her money. Mukesh did not even bother to look up from his phone screen at first. When he finally chose to do so, a look of pure disgust and annoyance crossed his face. Instead of simply doing his job and helping the man, Mukesh decided to use his position to bully him. He sneered openly, waving his hand dismissively to tell the old man that the bank did not just hand out cash because someone brought in a book. He sharply ordered him to go away, stating that they required official legal proof of relation before doing anything. The old man left the building, looking incredibly confused but entirely determined. A few days later, he returned to the branch with a note written by the local village headman, which was the only form of proof an illiterate jungle dweller could possibly gather. But Mukesh would not even glance at the paper. He simply did not want to bother dealing with the tedious paperwork of a tribal death claim. Mukesh snapped at him again, his tone incredibly sharp and mocking, telling the old man that they could not do anything in this case, and that his sister's physical presence was completely necessary for the transaction. The tribal old man just stared at him, his large dark eyes completely blank with misunderstanding. He did not comprehend Mukesh's cruel, bureaucratic sarcasm at all. He took the words entirely literally. He nodded his head slowly, turned around, and walked quietly out of the bank. Right after the staff lunchtime, around 2:45 p.m., a sudden, horrific odor hit the lobby first. Before the security guard could even react to the smell, the heavy glass entrance doors swung wide open. My breath caught completely in my throat. There stood the old tribal man, his face completely drenched in a mixture of sweat and tears, his chest heaving heavily. Straddled directly across his broad shoulders was a long, heavy bundle wrapped tightly in a stained, dirty cloth. It had taken him well over an hour of agonizing, grueling physical labor to dig into the earth of the forest grave where he had originally buried her, pulling her cold corpse back out of the dirt. He had then carried her body on his back for miles under the scorching afternoon sun, just to bring her to us. The security guard screamed in terror and tried to block him at the entrance, but the old man pushed forward into the lobby with a desperate primal strength. He locked his eyes onto counter number 2 and yelled out with pure agony, crying out to Mukesh that he had finally brought his sister and that they must now give him the money. The entire bank staff froze in absolute paralyzing shock. The lobby went deathly quiet, save for the old man's heavy, ragged breathing on the floor. My hands shook so violently that I could barely function at my desk. I grabbed the landline phone and dialed the police, my voice trembling uncontrollably as I reported the situation. As we waited for the sirens to arrive, I looked across the room. The old man had collapsed entirely to his knees on the tiled floor, weeping silently, his calloused hands clutching the dirty cloth, covering his sister's corpse. Then I looked over at Mukesh. To my utter horror, Mukesh was looking down at the weeping man, and his lips were curled into a sharp, smug, malicious smile. It was the grin of a monster who found the absolute destruction of a human being's dignity amusing. When the police finally arrived and carried the corpse away, wrapping it in a proper sheet, I sat at my desk completely numb. That was the day I truly realized how cruel and unfeeling this world can be. Because as the police checked the passbook to file their official report, the final balance was revealed. All of that intense suffering, the desecration of a grave, the miles walked in the heat, and the unfathomable heartbreak was all for exactly 2,400 rupees.
This happened on Halloween of 2019. My friends and I were feeling the spooky vibes of the month and wanted to do something fun and exciting to satisfy our thirst. Being the dumb college students that we were, we decided on exploring somewhere allegedly haunted in the hopes of seeing some genuine paranormal activity. Since we're from Illinois, the popular destination of Bachelor's Grove Cemetery immediately came to mind, and it was settled upon. Once the sun had set and night had fallen, we were to make our move, sneaking into the cemetery after it closed to get the full experience without having to worry about any other visitors. I must admit, I always wanted to do something like this before, but I was genuinely afraid of what might be waiting for us in that cemetery so late at night. Stories always circulated around the various apparitions people had encountered before, the different sounds that chilled them to the bone, and so on. Anyway, all of this was festering inside of me well before we actually started driving over to the cemetery sometime in the evening. It was a pleasantly long drive, but I wasn't really in the mood to think about anything else except for the potential horrors that roam the cemetery for all eternity, or so they say. Couple in the fact that we were going to be trespassing in order to get through in the first place, and I was a nervous wreck. My friends were apparently doing a much better job at keeping their fears in check, though. For the sake of the story, I'll call them Logan, Paul, and Eddie. The entire car ride there, they were laughing and joking around, not worried about what we would be getting into or what we might see. Looking back at the whole situation, I should have known that their optimism was a bad sign. No way would we have been able to explore this place without them being the slightest bit nervous, but what's done is done. A little past 7, once night had finally fallen for real and darkness went on in every direction for as far as the eye could see, we arrived. Parking in the main parking lot was out of the question, because we did some looking into it and found that in previous years, local law enforcement liked to wait there and catch any would-be explorers before they could even get inside. So we had a backup plan. Since the actual cemetery was located in the center of a dense forest on all sides, essentially forming a square where all the roads would go around it, we were to park at some restaurant that was open super late and had a huge parking lot all the way in the back. furthest away from the restaurant itself and closest to the road. This was in the exact opposite direction from the front entrance of the cemetery, so we figured this was our best chance of getting in while avoiding any cops in our way. From there, we cross the street on foot and have a bit of a walk before arriving at a somewhat hidden path leading into the forest. Taking this back path would take a bit more to get to the actual cemetery itself, since there were trees particularly thick and dense, but it was well worth it when considering the alternative. After everything was said and done, we found ourselves beginning our trek onto the path, unsure of how far we'd actually have to go before we find what we were looking for. It was a windy night, and even though it wasn't especially cold or anything, I still remember my teeth chattering and my skin going cold. Aside from the occasional sounds of leaves being crunched under our shoes as we walked, there was absolute silence. My once cheerful and energetic friends were now all of a sudden quiet and subdued. Logan in particular had this odd expression on his face, it being illuminated by my phone's flashlight as we walked. It was some sort of cross between fear and pain, like every step he took was causing him physical harm. Before I could question him about it, we found ourselves at our destination. Here we were, in the heart of Bachelor's Grove, with graves all around us and a certain chill in the air. Everyone split up to cover more ground, promising to call the others over if they were to encounter something. I didn't want us going too far away from one another, but I also didn't want to seem like a complete baby, so I kept my mouth shut and began exploring. Most of the graves I looked at had withered away from time and the elements, so I couldn't really make out anything that was on the tombstones. The few dates that I could read went back to the late 1800s, and a sinking feeling in my stomach started once I realized these people had been dead and decaying in the ground for over 100 years. Feeling extremely uncomfortable with this realization, I began to back away from the graves and started to look for my friends to see if they had found anything supernatural. Yet, when all of a sudden I heard it. Not just me either, all of us did. It was a low, almost unnoticeable if you weren't paying attention, but with the way our senses were heightened, there was no way we would miss it. It appeared to be some sort of chanting, and it sounded like it was coming a little bit north from our direction, further in a clearing. I couldn't make out any of the words being spoken, or if it was even in English, but there was something creepy about the tone, like it was religious, and the chanting was some sort of prayer. The voice that was doing the chanting was deep and gravelly, belonging to some man that we couldn't see. The four of us shone our lights on each other to see our expressions, and at that moment, we knew what we were going to do. Despite every fiber in my being telling me not to go any further and see what the source of this chanting was, my curiosity got the better of me, and I couldn't resist. Eddie quickly whispered a warning for us to turn our flashlights completely off, while he simultaneously dimmed his own phone light, just enough to prevent us from attracting too much unwanted attention, yet still leaving it bright enough so that we would all be able to see where we were stepping. The next few moments we spent creeping towards the noise, the more and more I started to lose it. My breathing was uncontrollable, and it felt like my heart was beating 1,000,000 miles an hour. I was so afraid of what we would find, and yet I still had to know. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, we had entered the clearing and were a mere few steps away from this chanting. Eddie shone his light in the direction ahead of us, and for just a brief moment, we saw a cloaked figure bent over something in the grass, still chanting in that unrecognizable language. The thing in the grass looked like some sort of circle with a mark in the center, and I swear to God I wish I could tell you I'm lying about this, but when I realized what the symbol was, I felt like throwing up. There was no mistake, it was a pentagram, made of some strange material. For the moment that Eddie had illuminated the sight in front of us, I had been able to get a glimpse of the pentagram's material being bright red, and I shouldn't have to say any more about that. Once the light from Eddie's phone hit the back of the man's head, he immediately stopped chanting and stood up, still facing the direction of the pentagram. I can only describe the next few minutes as truly unadulterated terror. Before we knew it, he screamed a blood-curdling scream that rattled us to the core and turned around, beginning to sprint towards us. Everything happened so fast, I couldn't even make out the man's facial features except for deep sunken eyes and an expression that radiated pure hatred. He really did want to bring us harm, and not wasting any time, we all fled the direction we came from and ran faster than I think any of us had ever run in our entire lives. I couldn't even scream while running. I was too petrified to make any noise. Maybe it was a miracle but we somehow managed to retrace our steps all the way through the path we took to enter the cemetery and forest, and eventually came out the main road, which was devoid of any traffic for the time being. Afraid of what I would see if I looked back, I made a beeline for the car along with the others, and hopped into the back seat, not wasting any time to lock the door and roll up the window. We peeled out of there in no time flat, and didn't stop driving 20 over the speed limit until we were at least 10 minutes away. Honestly, I have no idea how far or how long that man chased us, but I do know this for sure. We weren't supposed to be there that night, and we must have been interrupting something important of his. I'll never know what it was, and honestly, I don't hope to ever find out. We never did talk about this experience again after that night, and we never went on another trip to somewhere abandoned or haunted ever again either. I think that fright we felt is enough to satisfy us for the rest of our lives, and I'm thankful beyond words that we all managed to get out together, alive. Right after I dropped out of high school and moved out of my parents' house, I needed work real bad. I would have done pretty much anything for rent money about that time in my life. So I was lucky, or unlucky depending on how a person looks at it, that the local cemetery needed employees. At first, the old-timers who had been working there for 20 or 30 years just wondered why someone so young would ever want to be a gravedigger. It was hard work, really bad on the lower back, but I soon adjusted, and it turned out to be something more akin to a free gym membership than an actual job. I mean it, I got swole pretty fast. And if I'm honest, it only ever felt like work if the weather was bad or we had an actual funeral on site. Otherwise, it was just nice to be able to spend time outdoors. So, the way our cemetery was set up was pretty simple. The majority of the grounds were just regular grave sites, all pretty much the same size and same price. But the northwest corner of the grounds was a private site that contained much larger plots. These were reserved for much wealthier families, and the local undertaker made a lot of cash from selling extravagant grave setups to them. I'm talking whole mausoleums, statues of angels, and stuff like that. We hardly ever visited that area of the site except for cleaning and maintenance duties, and those were never left to me. I didn't take it personally, but the older guys just didn't trust me with all the cleaning chemicals and whatnot that kept the marble and brass fixtures looking fresh. Which is why it was so weird when I got a call on one of my days off, asking me if I had been up to that area recently. My boss was absolutely livid on the phone. I could hear the anger vibrating in his voice, and he pulled no punches when he demanded to know if I had been screwing around on the northwest plots. Of course, I immediately told him no, and explained that the last time I had been up there was simply to watch one of the old-timers using the marble cleaning chemical as part of my training, and that had been months back. He sighed heavily, seeming completely confused and confounded by the whole situation. So I asked him what exactly the issue was. He replied that the explanation could wait until the next time I was at work, leaving me to worry about it in the meantime. I was worried, sure, but I was pretty sure that I had not done anything wrong. Not deliberately anyway, and especially nothing that involved the northwest plots. A couple of days later, when I rolled into work, the atmosphere was incredibly tense. I knew something fairly serious had happened. All I knew was that I would not have to badger anyone to find out why. The boss man walked me out to the northwest plot, silent the whole way, and I knew better than to open my mouth until I found out exactly what was going on. There was already a worker up in the plot tending to one of the graves, and that was when my boss confronted me directly. He told me that if I had been hanging around the area, maybe during my lunch break, eating a few snacks among the opulent grave sites, now would be the time to come clean and tell him. I swore to God that I had not done that, explaining that I knew better than to eat stuff near the graves, as I had been well informed during my training that food attracts wild animals that can in turn do serious damage to some of the resting places. And that was when he broke down the situation for me. Something had tried to dig up one of the freshly dug graves out on the northwest plots. He specifically said something in particular, not someone, because each of us had enough experience to recognize when a grave had been dug up by tools or by hand, or in this case by claw. It was rough around the edges, with obvious claw marks left behind in the dirt, as opposed to the straight, clean lines carved out by a shovel. This was something of an emergency. I mean, for obvious sanitary reasons, but for sentimental reasons too. If local families discovered that wild animals were trying to dig up their deceased relatives, there would be an absolute uproar in the community. Something had to be done, and quickly. A meeting was called among all the gravediggers in attendance. As far as we could tell, The mysterious digging had been taking place overnight and was mostly undertaken by some kind of scavenger animal, like a coyote, a black bear, or maybe even an escaped large dog. The solution was obvious to everyone. Night watchmen would have to be present in the cemetery every single night until the situation was resolved. And guess who was voluntold to be the night watchman for the first full week? You guessed it, the young guy, the new guy, me. The only thing that made the proposal even vaguely attractive was the fact that anyone doing the night work would be paid double the regular rate, and I could definitely have done with the extra cash. First night of being on watch really sucked. All I had for company was a flask of strong coffee and a .22 pellet gun loaned to me by one of the other workers to take down any varmints. It was long, boring, and lonely, but once I adjusted my sleeping pattern, it got a little easier. Then on the second to last night of my watchman duty, I was on a little foot patrol walking towards the northwest plot with a flashlight in my hand, and that was when I saw it, a flurry of frantic limbs digging at the earth. I could have shouted something, maybe even fired the .22 in the air to scare the animal away, but I realized that if I killed whatever critter was causing us so much trouble, I might be out of the extra pay. But at least I would have my daytime life back. I crept up slowly, turning the flashlight off and sneaking stealthily towards the dark shape, working away at the earth. I had hunted rabbits at night with my uncle before, so I figured I would use the old flashlight technique to cause the animal to freeze for a second, so I could take the killing shot. But when I did, when I aimed that powerful flashlight in the direction of the digging thing, I almost cried out in fear. It was not an animal at all. It was a human, crouched on all fours, digging away at the earth with his or her bare hands. I could not bring myself to aim the rifle. I was too shocked at what I was looking at. So all I did was start making as much noise as possible, yelling at them to get out of there and shouting that I would call the cops if they did not comply. They complied all right, but not out of fear. The look in that person's eyes was one of pure fury, absolute anger that they had been interrupted in their obscene little act. I swear if I had not had that rifle with me, if I had not possessed the means to defend myself that were obvious to them, I honestly do not know if I would be here today to tell this story. Needless to say, the other workers did not believe me in what I saw. Some of them told me they did not doubt that I had seen something, but they disputed what that thing actually was. And I get that, I really do, but still I don't know what I saw. The police struggled to determine anything other than maybe a few boot footprints, but it really did not lead to anything else, as that individual ran far, far into the tree line beyond what I was capable of seeing. All I know is that it was definitely a person.
Did you get a job yet? No, Mom, not yet, I replied. What happened to the last interview? Did they call you? It was Thursday evening, and I was having some snacks with my mom, and we were having a nice conversation when she started asking these questions. I didn't get it. She gave me a concerned look at my answer, while I just kept my head down, focused on the bowl ahead in front of me. I knew what her expressions were without even looking at her. It was as if she is trying to tell me that get over what happened in the past and continue to focus on what was ahead of us. Even though I had told her everything, I know she doesn't believe me and thinks of my story as a delusion created by my own mind. But only I know what I experienced, and getting over it is not as easy as people say. There is only me and my mom in our family. Father cheated on my mom when she was pregnant with me. She raised me on her own. But as I was growing older, she started to look tired all the time. So I asked her to stop working, and I myself started to do some part-time jobs. Our family is not very well off, so I had to work overtime most of the time. It was about 15 to 20 days ago when I couldn't find any job. I got an opportunity to work as a cemetery keeper. There were 2 shifts. First was between 6 a.m. to 7 p.m., and second was between 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. For some reason, the pay for the evening shift was way higher than the day one, but still people were rejecting the offer. As I was already in urgent need of money, I took the evening shift as an opportunity to earn some extra cash. But I had no idea back then what was the real reason behind people not accepting this job, even after pay being this high. It was the first day of my job. I tried to take as much sleep as I could for the day so that I would be able to focus on my job during night. But I woke up around 4 p.m. and couldn't sleep after that. The cemetery wasn't that far, so I head out for the job around 6:30 p.m. I reached there on time. It looked like a pretty old cemetery, and no one was visiting at that hour. There was a cabin at the end of the cemetery just around the corner. I guess that must be for the cemetery keepers. I walked towards him, and I was walking. I saw an old man, must be in his late 50s, from the small window in the cabin. He was sitting in the wooden chair placed inside the cabin. The chair must be for keepers to sit and look and have a watch in the cemetery from that small window. I figured he must be another keeper besides me. Why did they hire another one when they already had a keeper? It's not like people visit at this hour, and there was absolutely no possibility of a robbery at this place. That's what I was thinking at the moment. I walked inside, looked at him, and introduced myself. "Hi, my name is Luca. I'm the new keeper." He stared at me, but no response. It felt awkward to me, so again tried to make the environment a bit of lighter, and asked him if he was also a keeper, but he didn't respond. He stood up and walked out. I shrugged my shoulders, sat in the chair, and started to look outside. Several hours passed. I opened my phone to check time, and it was 12:50 a.m. I was feeling bored because there was absolutely nothing to do, and I was also getting a bit sleepy. I tried my best to stay awake, but it failed, and I fell asleep. I saw myself standing in the middle of the cemetery, and I guessed that I must be dreaming. I looked around and saw someone burying something. It was hard to see the man's face from the distance, so I walked a bit closer. I fell back when I saw it was the old man from earlier. He was burying a boy's body. He looked like a teenager to me. Old man's hand was dirtier with the mud and blood of the boy. He turned around, looking straight past me, scanning the area, trying to see if anyone's coming or not. I guessed he couldn't see me. After he was finished burying, he went ahead, washed his hands, and sat in the chair in the cabin. I was suddenly in a different scenario. It was evening time. The old man was watching from his cabin. I looked towards the direction, and there were two boys who were sitting in front of a grave where their parents were buried. The old man got up and walked towards them. He started asking them sympathetically about their family and why they were alone there. The boys told him that their only remaining family was each other, and they don't have anyone else. He looked at him with weird eyes, and then his expression quickly changed again to the sympathetic one. He took the boys to the cabin and started talking to them. Between the conversation, old man tooled out some sweets to eat and gave it to them. They suddenly passed out as they were eating. After that, the old man took out their clothes one by one and started raping them. After raping, he took out a large plastic and placed them over that. And then, he first cut their bodies in two halves, and then buried only the upper parts of both in one grave. Then he came back to the cabin and raped the lower halves of their bodies several times over the night. As the sun was about to come out within hours, he buried the rest of the bodies as well. Scenario changed again, and suddenly there was another young teen boy who he had called in. Old man offered the boy sweets, but he refused, saying he doesn't feel like eating anything. The man started to force him to eat, so he stood up to leave. But as he walks outside, the old man hit him in the head and he passed out. Old man was dragging him inside the cabin, but the boy woke up and struggled to get free. The man looked annoyed by that and jumped over to rape him, but the boy kicked him with all his might. He fell backward, his head hit one of the tombstones and started to bleed. The boy ran outside the cemetery without even looking back. The old man kept staring at his back while taking his last breath. I woke up from a sharp pain in my back, which felt like getting scratched from something. I noticed I was being dragged, so I tried to look around, but there was no one around me. Then I noticed the old man standing at a distance, glaring at me with a monstrous look on his face. I was being dragged towards him. I started to scream for help. I tried to grab whatever came in my way to stop it, but it did not. I was screaming from the top of my lungs so that someone can hear me, but no one could. And I was sure at the time that I am going to die here. At the same time, I felt an invisible force pulling me from the opposite direction. So I looked at the old man's face, but it wasn't him. His face looked annoyed. I looked above my head, but nobody was there. But then suddenly, a figure of the boy who I'm seeing in the dream appeared, and he pulled me toward himself. Once again, I looked toward old man, but there were multiples of teenagers surrounding him, and then they all vanished. I got up immediately and ran outside, terrified from the cemetery. After that, I went straight home and locked myself in my room. My mom was worried from my sudden behavior in return, so she started to knock on the door and ask me questions. I didn't come out my room for 3 days, and when I came out, I told my mom about everything. She looked worried about me, but I know she didn't believe me. She thought I may have gotten scared from a nightmare, but only I know that it wasn't the case.
In my early 20s, I went through a wandering stage. I had just graduated from college, couldn't find a job anywhere. Rather than go a couple $100s into the hole every month, paying for rent while searching for a job, I decided to pack up with my few belongings I owned and headed out to see the country. And this is something I cannot recommend enough. Stay off the interstates, hop a train from time to time, and hitchhike with no particular destination in mind. It was this kind of aimless wandering that led me to the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. If you've never experienced them, the Barrens are an amazing place. Huge stands of oak and evergreen trees, many older than time itself, grow out of that strange, sickly soil. Sugar sand, the locals call it in the rainy season, that forms quicksand. And then the dry season, it can still swallow farm machinery whole. Of the few farms that I saw, they all looked like they had seen better times, and many looked like they had sat untouched for decades. There was something alluring about that place, a sort of ancient secret I was afforded glimpses of in the shadows when the wind stirred the trees. The sort of movement at the edge of your vision that follows you throughout the day, but disappears as soon as you turn your head. From time to time, I hiked down old dusty roads. An old pickup truck or a rusted-out car would bound over a hill toward me. Most times, the driver would eye me suspiciously and speed up as they approached. Occasionally, the driver would stop to talk to me for a few minutes. "What are you doing out here?" one old toothless man clad in overalls asked me wandering around. "Seeing what there is to see," I replied. The old man spat out a putrid brown stream into the dust. "Ain't nothing to see around here." When I asked the old man what he meant by that, he made a guttural, throaty sound. I wasn't sure if he was choking on his tobacco or bothered by the question, but he didn't answer. He offered me a ride in his pickup the way that I had come back into town. But when I declined, he spat out into the dirt again and sped off, shaking his head. My eventual plan was to make it to Delaware sometime that summer and meet up with some extended family there, but I was in no hurry. In truth, I had been in heaven these last few weeks, taking my time heading south and exploring anything that caught my eye. I had explored every abandoned building and every cave I had seen. I had half my weight in power bars in my backpack. But over the last 2 months, I had honed my skills at trapping rabbits and gathering wild edibles. Sitting up late at night beside my campfire and sleeping beneath the stars. The night sky in an area so devoid of human influence is beyond comprehension. But tonight, there were clouds moving in, and the sun was disappearing faster than I had grown accustomed to. When the deep roar of thunder shook the valley, I knew that I had better find shelter. In the failing sunlight, I could see in the distance some structures at the top of the hill. I ran the half-mile distance and was disappointed to see that the ancient house and barn were in terrible shape. The roof of the barn had been completely collapsed, and the upper 2 floors of this 3-story house had collapsed into a mangle of ancient wood. Still, the house was my best option, so I made my way toward it as the heavens began to open up. As I'd seen on other properties in the area, this house had a small cemetery in the yard. I ran toward the gaping front door of the dilapidated house, carefully making my way between the headstones. When lightning flashed, I was able to make out the name on several of the headstones, which the elements hadn't completely erased. When they got inside, the floor was spongy, but felt solid enough to hold my weight. I took off my pack and set it near the door, caught my breath, and had a look around. The hinges of the front door had long since rusted away, but I was able to fit the door back into the opening enough to hopefully keep the wind and rain out. At one end of the room, there was a stone fireplace and chimney which was solidly constructed, but I had no wood for a fire. Next to the fireplace was a stairwell full of rubble and cobwebs. I didn't dare apply my weight to those steps, as many had rotted to nothing under their own pitiful weight. Opposite the front door was an opening to an old kitchen of sorts, but when I tried to approach it, my foot went clean through the floor, and I decided to stay put until the storm blew over. The remains of the upper floor did an adequate job of keeping the ground floor dry, and I was able to arrange my sleeping bag so that very little water draining from the upper floors managed to land on it. I got out my harmonica and played for a few minutes, then stopped, apprehensive. I didn't know what I was afraid of, but something had chilled me to my core. Outside, the storm had continued to build in intensity. My eyes were focused on that stairwell, seeing nothing in darkness, and flash blinded when lightning struck. I must have fallen asleep at some point because suddenly I came to with a searing pain in my neck from leaning my head against the wall for so long. Outside, the storm continued to pound down its fury upon Earth. As I sat there, rubbing my neck, and began to chuckle to myself for getting wrapped up in the superstition of the area when I heard it. At first, I heard indiscriminate movement of stairs, and the ruins of the upper 2 floors. I was just about to write it off as rats, when suddenly it stopped. I froze in place, daring only to move my eyes, and even then, just barely. After 30 seconds of paralytic fear, I smiled at myself again, and was just about to settle into my sleeping bag when I looked toward the stairs. At the top of the doorway were a pair of glowing red orbs staring directly at me. Very slowly, they closed down to horizontal slits, then opened up again wider than before. I can't tell you how long I sat there staring at it, staring at me. It could have been a second. It could have been hours. And eventually, my lower-level self-preservation skills began to kick in, and subconsciously, I started reaching for the knife on my belt. Our eyes locked. My hand progressed inch by inch towards my only means of defending myself. Neither of us blinked for what felt like hours, and while the storm raged on, I prayed for another lightning strike so that I might even catch a glimpse of my adversary. But despite the ferocity of the rain, the darkness was absolute. When, at last, my hand reassuringly touched the hilt of my knife, it seemed as if the very fabric of existence was ripped to shreds. The creature began bellowing in the most unearthly, mind-numbing shriek I'd ever heard. Knowing I only had one chance, in one fluid motion, I released the snap that held my knife in place, and released an inside overhand throw that I had practiced during my years of my misspent adolescence. I heard a sickening, wet thunk, and the shrieking increased in volume 100-fold. As I smashed that rotten door to pieces, I heard the creature flapping against the wall and screaming. Just as I wrenched the remains of the door open, a great flash of lightning struck. And all around the house, I saw piles of bones, feathers, and fur. I ran as I had never run before, since I ran into my veins pumped acid and my limbs were stone. I couldn't see where I was going, but I could follow the dirt roads by the sounds of the sugar sand slipping roadside debris into the ditches. I didn't dare look over my shoulder. When the sun finally rose, I collapsed in the middle of the road. Heaving, oblivious to the downpour, I awoke with a startle to the sound of a car horn blaring inches from my head. I leaped to my feet and spun around to see the same old man from yesterday holding his sides with laughter. When I opened my mouth to speak, he motioned with his thumb to the back of his truck. I climbed in without a word, and he began to drive. The events of the previous night had begun to replay themselves in my head. What had just happened? No matter how many times I considered what I saw, none of it made any sense. As we drove, I realized how far I had run in the dark. It must have been nearly 10 miles. I was angry with myself for being so terrified by a dream. And that's the only thing that could have been approached from this angle. Everything fit into place and experienced a false awakening. There's so many times in the past when experimenting with dream herbs. I had a nightmare and woke up with adrenaline pumping and abandoned all of my gear in an old house. I suddenly realized that the truck had sat motionless for quite some time, and the old man was turned around in the seat, staring at me. I looked up at him, and he grinned. With sickening horror, I realized that we were at the bottom of the hill on which that wretched house sat. I jumped out of the pickup and thanked the old man who drove off. I slowly walked up the muddy path that led to the house, composing myself. When I reached the yard, I saw the old piles of bones which had shocked me the previous nights during the storm. Of course, there were coyotes and foxes in the area, and I had hunted a couple wild turkeys. The critters probably had their dens around here, and they had been using the house as a windbreak. Inside the house, everything appeared as I had left it. My sleeping bag, my pack, and my harmonica was sitting on the floor, and I could see my knife sticking out of the wall across the room. I packed everything up and put on my backpack, then walked over to the stairs and pulled my knife out of the wall. I was about to return it to the sheath on my belt when I looked at the blade and noticed the dried-on blood and that clump of oily black hair stuck to it.